"You're not coming to the graduation," Dad texted. "Sarah's in-laws think it's best if you sit this one out." I just replied, "Copy that." Then I pulled the plug on everything I paid for. The venue, the caterer, even the photographer. They didn't know until guests started showing up to nothing. I, 52M, stared at the text message for what felt like an eternity, reading it over and over until the words burned into my retinas. My daughter's graduation party, the one I'd been planning and paying for since she started her senior year, and I wasn't invited. Sarah's in-laws thought it was best if I sat this one out. 22 years of being her father, and apparently that meant nothing when her new husband's family decided I was persona non grata. The divorce had been messy, sure. My ex-wife had painted me as the villain in her little narrative, and somehow that story had spread to Sarah's new in-laws. They'd never met me, never bothered to get my side of the story, but they'd already made their judgment. I was the bad guy who needed to be excluded from his own daughter's milestone celebration. I typed back a simple response, "Copy that." 2 words that would change everything, though they had no idea what was coming. Sarah had gotten married 6 months ago to a guy whose parents owned half the commercial real estate in town. They were the type of people who threw money around to solve problems and expected everyone to fall in line with their wishes. When they'd heard the divorce stories from my ex-wife, they'd apparently decided I was a liability to their family's reputation. The graduation party had been my idea from the start. Sarah had gotten her master's degree in engineering, something I was incredibly proud of. I'd started planning the celebration the moment she told me she was graduating summa cum laude. I'd booked the Riverside Country Club, hired the best caterer in the city, arranged for a photographer, even commissioned a custom cake from the bakery that had made her birthday cakes since she was 5. Everything was set for Saturday afternoon. 50 guests, all the extended family, her college friends, even some of her professors. I'd spent close to $15,000 making sure it would be perfect for her. But now I wasn't welcome at my own daughter's party. I sat in my home office, looking at the stack of contracts and receipts spread across my desk. Every vendor, every detail, every payment had gone through me. The country club had my credit card on file. The caterer was expecting my check. The photographer had been paid half up front, with the balance due on the day of the event. My phone buzzed with another text from my ex-wife, probably following up on the message from my daughter's father-in-law. I didn't bother reading it. Instead, I picked up my phone and started making calls. The country club was first. I explained to the event's coordinator that there had been a family emergency and I needed to cancel the reservation immediately. She was sympathetic, mentioning that they'd had several last-minute cancellations recently due to various crises. The deposit was non-refundable, but I didn't care about the money at this point. Next was the caterer. The owner was less understanding, mentioning that they'd already purchased ingredients and started prep work for Saturday's event. I told him I understood the inconvenience, but that circumstances beyond my control had forced the cancellation. He said he'd have to charge me a cancellation fee, and I agreed without argument. The photographer was the easiest call. She was actually relieved, mentioning that she'd been dreading working another graduation party that weekend since she already had 2 others booked. She offered to refund half of the deposit as a goodwill gesture. The bakery was more complicated. The custom cake was already finished, sitting in their display case with "Congratulations, Sarah" written in elegant script across the top. They couldn't refund the money, but they offered to change the message and sell it to another customer. I told them to do whatever they wanted with it. By Thursday evening, I'd systematically dismantled every aspect of the graduation party. The venue was canceled, the food wasn't coming, the photographer wouldn't be there, and even the flowers I'd ordered were redirected to a different event. I didn't tell anyone what I'd done. Not Sarah, not my ex-wife, not even my brother who was supposed to drive down from Chicago for the party. I figured they'd find out soon enough. Friday night, I got a call from Sarah. She sounded excited, talking about how she couldn't wait for tomorrow and how grateful she was that everyone was coming together to celebrate with her. She mentioned that her mother-in-law had taken over some of the coordination, working with the vendors to finalize details. I listened to her enthusiasm and felt a pang of guilt. This wasn't really about her. She was caught in the middle of a situation created by adults who should have known better. But the damage was done, and I wasn't about to back down now. She asked if I was okay, mentioning that I sounded distant. I told her I was just tired from work and that I hoped she had a wonderful day tomorrow. She said she loved me and hung up. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather. Sunny, 75 degrees, not a cloud in the sky. The kind of day that would have been perfect for an outdoor celebration at the country club's garden pavilion. I spent the morning at my apartment, drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. My phone was turned off. I didn't want to deal with the inevitable calls and texts that would start coming once people began arriving at the country club. Around noon, I turned my phone back on. The messages started flooding in immediately. My brother had texted asking where the hell the party was. He'd driven 4 hours and was standing in an empty parking lot at the country club. The staff there had no record of any event scheduled for that day. My ex-wife had left 3 increasingly frantic voicemails. The first was confused, asking if there had been a change of venue. The second was angry, demanding to know what was going on. The third was pure rage, accusing me of sabotaging Sarah's day out of spite. Sarah's mother-in-law had somehow gotten my number and left a message that was equal parts bewildered and furious. She'd apparently spent the morning trying to coordinate with vendors who kept telling her that everything had been canceled. But it was Sarah's message that hit me the hardest. She'd sent a single text. "Dad, what happened? Everyone's here and there's nothing. Please call me." I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to call her immediately, to explain everything, to apologize for the collateral damage. But another part of me, the part that had been excluded from his own daughter's celebration, felt vindicated. They'd made their choice when they decided I wasn't worthy of being included. They'd assumed they could just cut me out and everything would continue as planned. They'd forgotten that I was the one who'd made it all possible in the first place. Update 1. The fallout was immediate and brutal. By Sunday morning, I had dozens of missed calls and text messages from family members, friends, and people I barely knew. The story had spread quickly through our social circle. The father who'd sabotaged his daughter's graduation party out of spite. My sister called me Sunday afternoon, her voice tight with anger. She told me that Sarah had spent Saturday evening crying, that the whole family was embarrassed, and that I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She said that Sarah's in-laws were talking about getting a restraining order, claiming I was unstable and potentially dangerous. I tried to explain my side of the story, but she wasn't interested in hearing it. In her mind, nothing justified what I'd done. Sarah was innocent in all of this, and I'd punished her for other people's decisions. Monday brought a call from my lawyer. Word had gotten back to him about the weekend's events, and he was concerned about how it might affect other aspects of my life. He reminded me that I was up for a promotion at work and that this kind of publicity could be damaging to my professional reputation. But the call that really got to me came Tuesday evening. It was Sarah. She asked me to meet her for coffee, just the two of us. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the hurt underneath. She suggested a place downtown, neutral territory where we could talk without interference from anyone else. I agreed, though I spent the next day dreading the conversation. I knew she was going to ask me to explain myself, and I wasn't sure I had an explanation that would make sense to anyone else. We met at a small cafe near her office. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. She looked tired, older somehow than she had just a week ago. She asked me directly why I'd done it. Not accusingly, just genuinely wanting to understand how things had gotten to this point. I told her about the text message, about being excluded from her celebration, about feeling like I'd been erased from her life by people who'd never even met me. I explained that I'd spent months planning every detail of the party, that it had meant everything to me to be able to celebrate her achievement. She listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she told me something I hadn't known. She said that she'd never asked for me to be excluded from the party. The decision had been made by her mother-in-law, who'd convinced her husband and my ex-wife that it would be less dramatic if I wasn't there. Sarah had only found out about it when her father-in-law sent me the text message. She said she'd been planning to call me that week to talk about it, to see if we could find a compromise. She'd been caught between her new family's wishes and her desire to have her father at her graduation celebration. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. All of this could have been avoided if I'd just waited, if I'd talked to her before reacting. But she also told me something else. She said that watching everything fall apart on Saturday had shown her something important about the people around her. Her mother-in-law's reaction to the crisis had been to blame and attack rather than to problem solve. Her husband had spent the day making excuses instead of trying to salvage the situation. Meanwhile, my brother had immediately started calling around to local restaurants. trying to find somewhere that could accommodate 50 people on short notice. My sister had driven to 3 different grocery stores, buying supplies for an impromptu celebration at Sarah's apartment. Even some of her college friends had pitched in, turning what could have been a complete disaster into something resembling a party. Update 2. Sarah told me that the whole experience had been a wake-up call about the dynamics in her new marriage. She'd started to see how her in-laws operated, how they made decisions about other people's lives without consultation or consideration. The way they'd handled the situation with me was apparently part of a larger pattern of behavior. She said her husband had been supportive of his parents' decision to exclude me, even though he'd never met me and had no personal reason to dislike me. He'd simply gone along with what his family wanted, without considering how it might affect Sarah or me. The conversation lasted for over 2 hours. We talked about the divorce, about the stories that had been told about me, about the way family dynamics had shifted since she'd gotten married. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. By the end of it, I felt both better and worse. Better because I understood that Sarah hadn't been part of the decision to exclude me. Worse because I realized that my reaction had probably made everything more complicated for her. She asked me what I wanted to happen next. Did I want to try to repair relationships with her in-laws? Did I want to find a way to coexist peacefully? Or was I prepared to accept that this might have permanently damaged our relationship? I told her that I wanted whatever would make her life easier. If that meant staying away from family events, I could do that. If it meant trying to make peace with her in-laws, I was willing to try. What I couldn't do was pretend that what had happened was okay. She said she needed some time to think about everything, to figure out how to move forward. She asked me not to contact her for a few weeks while she sorted things out with her husband and his family. I agreed, though it was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Walking away from that coffee shop, I felt like I was losing my daughter all over again. The next few weeks were brutal. I threw myself into work, staying late every night and coming in on weekends. My colleagues noticed the change in my behavior, but nobody asked questions. The promotion I'd been hoping for was quietly taken off the table, though my boss never explicitly connected it to the graduation party incident. My social life essentially disappeared. Word had spread through our community about what I'd done, and people had taken sides. Some understood my position and thought I'd been treated unfairly. Others believed I'd gone too far and that nothing justified ruining Sarah's day. I started seeing a therapist, something I probably should have done years ago. She helped me understand that my reaction to being excluded had been about more than just the graduation party. It was about feeling powerless, about watching my relationship with my daughter slip away, about being defined by other people's narratives about who I was. But she also helped me see that my response had been destructive, both to Sarah and to myself. I'd let my hurt and anger drive me to make a decision that had caused pain to the person I loved most. Update 3. 3 weeks after our coffee meeting, Sarah called me. She said she'd made some decisions about her marriage and her relationship with her in-laws, and she wanted to talk. We met at the same cafe, but this time the conversation was different. She looked more confident, more settled in herself. She told me that she'd had several difficult conversations with her husband about his family's behavior and his willingness to go along with their decisions. She'd made it clear that any future decisions about family events needed to include her input, and that excluding me without her consent was not acceptable. Her husband had initially been defensive, but eventually he'd acknowledged that the situation had been handled poorly. He'd agreed to meet with me, to hear my side of the story, and to try to build a relationship independent of his parents' opinions. Sarah had also set boundaries with her mother-in-law. She'd made it clear that while she respected her new family's opinions, she wouldn't allow them to make unilateral decisions about her relationships with her own family members. The graduation party incident had apparently been a catalyst for other conversations about independence and decision-making in their marriage. Sarah said it had been painful, but ultimately necessary. She asked if I would be willing to meet with her husband to try to start over. She said she understood if I wasn't ready, but that she hoped we could find a way to move forward. I told her I was willing to try, though I was nervous about the meeting. I'd built up a lot of resentment toward him over the past month, and I wasn't sure I could set that aside easily. We arranged to meet the following weekend, just the 3 of us. Sarah suggested her apartment, somewhere neutral where we could talk without outside interference. The meeting was awkward at first. Her husband was clearly uncomfortable, probably expecting me to be angry or confrontational. Instead, I I tried to focus on understanding his perspective and finding common ground. He explained that his parents had convinced him that my presence at the graduation party would create drama and potentially ruin Sarah's day. They'd painted a picture of me as someone who was bitter about the divorce and likely to cause problems at family events. I acknowledged that the divorce had been difficult and that I'd probably said and done things I regretted. But I also explained that I'd never had any intention of causing problems at Sarah's celebration. All I'd wanted was to be there to support my daughter. The conversation lasted several hours. We talked about expectations, about communication, about how to handle future family events. It wasn't a complete resolution, but it was a start. By the end of the evening, we'd agreed on some basic ground rules. I would be included in major family events, but we'd communicate in advance about any concerns or potential issues. Sarah's husband would make an effort to get to know me as an individual rather than relying on other people's opinions. Most importantly, Sarah would be the primary decision-maker about her own family relationships. Neither her in-laws nor I would pressure her to choose sides or exclude people from her life. The whole experience had been devastating, but it had also been clarifying. I'd learned that my relationship with Sarah was strong enough to survive even my worst decisions. I'd also learned that sometimes the most destructive thing you can do is nothing, that allowing other people to make decisions about your life and relationships without fighting back can be just as damaging as fighting back too hard. The graduation party never happened, but Sarah and I planned a small celebration for just the two of us a few weeks later. We went to her favorite restaurant and talked about her future plans, her career goals, and the lessons we'd both learned from the whole mess. It wasn't the celebration I'd originally envisioned, but it was honest and real in a way that the original party might not have been. Sometimes the best celebrations are the ones that come after you've survived something difficult together. Looking back, I still believe that being excluded from my daughter's graduation party was wrong. But I also know that my response was disproportionate and hurtful. The real victory wasn't in proving that I could disrupt their plans. It was in eventually finding a way to rebuild trust and communication with the person who mattered most. The relationship with Sarah's in-laws remains complicated, but it's workable. They've never apologized for their role in the original conflict, but they've stopped actively trying to exclude me from family events. It's not friendship, but it's peaceful coexistence. Sarah's marriage seems stronger for having weathered this crisis. Her husband has become more independent from his parents' opinions, and Sarah has become more confident in setting boundaries with both sides of the family. As for me, I'm still working on managing my reactions to feeling excluded or dismissed. The therapy has helped, and I've learned to pause and consider consequences before making major decisions driven by emotion. The whole experience taught me that revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but it rarely solves the underlying problems. What it did do was force everyone involved to confront the real issues in our relationships and communication patterns. Sometimes it takes a crisis to create the space for honest conversation and real change.